Hi guys, and welcome to this new lecture. In this lecture we are going to learn about the trim path. Trim path will wipe in shape layers in and out, in fact. And here what you can see, it's a stroke of a shape layer of a rectangle that has been wiped in and at the same time being wiped out. Let's see what you can do with the trim path. I will delete these two layers and take the pen tool, for example, and start drawing a path. Just a simple path, nothing fancy. Of course, here I will see only the stroke because this is the pen tool. And here you have a path that you have drawn. Now, how do you animate that path? How can you do it on the screen coming in? For that, you will use the trim path. Let's twirl down the content of the shape layer. And here you have the add, and next to it there is an arrow. If you click on the arrow, you have very many options that are quite useful in very many cases. You are going to learn all of them in this course, and now we are going to focus only on the trim path. Let's choose the trim path, and it's always good to add the trim path in the contents. Don't add it in shape because it will be inside the shape and will not affect any other shape. So let's look at the trim path. You have start, you have three parameters, start and an offset. Fine. Now, how does it operate? Let's scrub through the start to a higher value, and you notice that the path is being wiped out in this case. If I use the end, you will notice that the path has been wiped out also, but from a different direction. And we will have the offset, we'll see how it works. Let's try to make an animation here. For example, if I take the trim path and put it at 100%, there will be nothing on the screen. I can keyframe it and come to 1 second. Take it back to 0. So we're working here with the start only. If you play your animation, you notice that your trim path is coming from the right side, or its end if you want. This is how start operates. Now let's remove the start from here, and we remove the keyframes, and let's work with the end. The end will work the opposite way. So if you take it to 0%, for example, you keyframe it here. After 1 second, you take it to 100%. Here you are, you will see your path being wiped in from the left side or the beginning of the path. Fine, let's do some interesting animation. First of all, we can have the line being opened. That's an underline. A square opening, for example. The circles being wiped in and out. Of course, we are working only on the stroke here. And we can include an introduction for a logo like you've seen to open up a logo in a fancy way. And let's start doing some animation. We'll start with the line here. Okay, how to open this line? We double click on this composition. There are a few things you need to notice here. First of all, this line is not opened through the scale. If you open it through the scale, the line will be very thin and then go thicker to the size of its stroke. But with the trim path, it will just open. Let's do this animation. We delete this layer, for example, just to make a new one. We click on the pen tool, we click in the beginning, and then we click in the end, and you have your line. Of course, you can change the stroke and you change the color. Let's open the content, and in content we want to add a trim path. In the beginning here, we can use the start to open to close the line, in fact now, or the end also on the same way. But if, let's say, put them at 50% each, it's pretty easy, by the way. You notice now that it completely disappeared because the start has wiped 50% and the end has wiped 50%, so there is nothing left here. Let's keyframe them, and if we go to 1 second, we move the start to open, and we move the end to open also to 0%. Here you are, you have a very nice animation. Of course, you can come and play with the easy ease to make it even more interesting. You can just select the two keyframes here, and we are now into the speed graph, and just make it, for example, speedier, just like this. Okay, that's one way to do it. If you notice now, it becomes a bit more interesting. Cool. You can come here and make it more interesting, playing with the keyframes, playing with the graph, and so on. What's important now is to learn about the start and the end. Let's go to our next composition, and this one will allow us to open a rectangle here. So of course we're going to use the trim path and we open the square composition. Here it's opening the square but stopping at a certain distance. How can we do that? Let's delete these two shape layers here. Draw a rectangle. Now we are going to draw a perfect square. That will be easier. And position it, for example, here. That's cool. Let's add a trim path in the content. And when you open here, you see there is offset. Now, the trim path starts from what we call the first vertex. The first vertex for a shape layer only exists when the shape layer is a Bezier shape. This is all explained to you inside the complex shape section. Nevertheless, now we can start working with it. So the start will start from the corner, and the end, of course, will start from the same corner. To shift this, we can offset it, for example, to 45. Now, if you use the start, it's going to offset just where we wanted, 45 degrees from here. Notice this is a square. That's why the 45 is coming here. If it were a rectangle, the 45 might have come, over here or a different place. So let's start. Let's say this one, we make it 6%. So that is the end. That's cool. And then this one is 94%. Cool. We wanted to stop there. So we come to 1 second and we keyframe the start and the end. Let's go to the beginning. Take the start to 50%. That will be enough. And take the end also to 50%. And here you are, you have it. It opens and it comes to the limit. Now, this is very cool as animation because you can come to the school online, for example, add a mask. And as soon as the rectangle is about to close, you can just move the mask. If I keyframe it here, just before it closes, and go backward maybe, and make the mask just like this. So here you are with a cool animation. Okay, the mask is too speedy. Let's make it longer. Fine. So you notice you want to sync them together and they will be quite useful animation. And this is very much used in introducing headlines, lower thirds, or whatever your imagination can lead you to. Let's go see what we can do, for example, with the circles. Here we have a circle opening. That's quite nice. And we know about the dash now. We can do this with the trim path. Let's open the circle. And we have here two circles opening. Let's delete these two shape layers and create new ones. And we go to the ellipse, click, Control and Shift, and open up. Fine. We can press Control Alternate Whom to center them. And we move it to the middle of the composition, for example, if you'd like to. Let's introduce the trim path here. I will go to Add and add a trim path. Now, the trim path for a circle, we just wipe the circle in and out. By the way, if you have a fill, for example here, it will also wipe the fill. But that is so ugly that usually it's not used, except in very special circumstances if you really need it. I usually don't like it. There are other wipes in the effects and presets that are much more interesting. So let's remove the fill. And you have here the wipe coming from the beginning till the end. Fine. Let's go to 100%, keyframe the end and keyframe the start. Go to 1 second, for example, and get the end to come over here, and we get the start also to come over here. Now, of course, nothing happens because the values are swiping each other. But if you select these two keyframes, the lower keyframes of the end or the start, you can do that and move them. You will see that it will wipe in with the end and it will wipe out with the start, or vice versa. Here you are. You can see the animation. Now, that's cool. Of course, if you choose the last two keyframes and make it speedier, it will give you a different aspect. Now, let's duplicate the shape. And now we have two shapes exactly on top of each other. Let's press U. And the second shape, for example, we press Shift S to get the scale. And we make it bigger. So now we have the two shapes coming in. Cool. Then we can take the layer and move it aside. That's fine. And take the last keyframes and move them. And also move these two keyframes on this side. You see, we just play with the keyframes and you will have something totally different. Of course, you can come to the shape layer, go to the ellipse, go to the stroke of the ellipse, and add some dashes here. You add the dashes, you add the gap. Let's see how it's happening. Fine. And we make it a round cap. So we have dots only. Make it small and make the gaps bigger. So now we have a dotted line that is coming in and out. So what is the principle here? It's pretty easy, but when you're doing lower thirds, you're doing titles, you're doing motion graphics, the usage is very wide. You notice now you are playing with the keyframes. You can easy ease them. You can move the layers to create even more animations that are pretty interesting. Let's duplicate this layer again, and we open the scale of this layer and make it even bigger. Let's go to the gaps in the content. We'll go to the ellipse and the stroke and find the gaps here, the dashes, and reduce the gaps, for example, or increase the gaps. Cool. So now you have something else, and of course we can move our layer to a different time and they will come out very nicely the way you want them to come out. You can download this project and see how I have done this animation here, which is multiple squares, and it's a very fancy animation, but it's very easy to be done. You notice how I duplicated the layers and just scaling them up and down. Every layer is scaled up on the other one, and you have the logo that's coming in. So please download the project here. It's called Trim Path, and try to see how this is done and try to understand also how you can manipulate this to make it even much better. See you in the next lecture.